what do you think has led to the unique blend of your own voice?
So I do think that is accurate. I think like anyone's voice, my voice is a combination of a lot of different factors. I also think like anyone's voice, it evolves. And I think for most people, your voice becomes maybe more unique, but definitely clearer and stronger over time. Yeah. You know, my first blog was in like 1999 or something, right? So I've been publishing stuff online for a long time and using social media for a long time and in a variety of different ways, right? So I think that the feedback that I get from people in particular is it's simple, it's clear. I do think there's an underlying confidence that I have both as a person and also from doing these things. You know, it's funny. I've said this to my wife and other people, you know, I'm like, you know, I can have a habit of stating opinions as facts. And because the way I state them, people sort of buy into it. Right. And sometimes I'll even like have to say to her, like, you know, I'm not saying this is actually true. Like, I almost have to sort of be like, I understand that it's coming across like whatever.
Josh, you have a reality distortion field.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But it's interesting. Like confidence is, and I don't mean arrogance, but confidence and a belief in that also comes from doing a lot of things and having a lot of experience and all of that kind of stuff. It's really powerful. And I think that comes across also in the writing that, you know, there's an authority to it, but mixed with a empathy. I think everybody can pick up on that. I genuinely want to help them, and I genuinely want them to do well, and genuinely believe that, especially with these new tools and all this, like amazing things are possible for anyone. And so I think that counters that blend, right, of that sort of empathy and generosity with the authority and confidence prevents it from being obnoxious. Because I think there's a lot of people out there that their voice, they speak and they write with a lot of authority and confidence, but you sort of feel like, well, but they're just trying to get my money, and you don't trust them. But the other thing too, I think there's two going all the way back besides my experiences and journalism, education, and jobs and all that kind of stuff, going all the way back to sort of growing up. I think there's two things that I was interested in and spent a lot of time consuming that really have informed a lot of my voice and writing in particular. And one is comedy. I've always been a huge fan of comedy, watching SNL and stand up and all that stuff from an incredibly young age. It's funny. I'll give you one quick story. I remember, I was maybe 10 years old at most, maybe younger. And my parents put me on a plane to go visit my aunt, and I grew up in Chicago. They put me on a plane to go visit my aunt in Pennsylvania. And somehow, I don't know how, I got my hands on a Sam Kinison tape, which was like filthy, right? So I listened to this tape on the plane, and I got off, and my aunt picked me up, and we're in her car driving back. And I said to her, I was like, "Oh, have you heard of Sam Kinison?" She's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, have you heard this tape? It's hilarious." And so I put it on in the car, and literally like the first bit is about like oral sex and like whatever it is. Right. And literally I was like maybe 10, probably younger. And my aunt looks at me and she's like, "Are you sure?" I probably didn't even understand half the jokes. She's like, "Are you sure you should be listening to this?" And I was like, "Well, I've already heard it." So she's like, "Yeah, I guess you've got a point." So comedy all the time. And very early hip hop, rap music. And what I've realized now in retrospect, both of those things, language and writing, they're both concise. It's the telling of a joke, rap lyrics, they're how much can you deliver in as few as words as possible. They both have a confidence to them in most cases. They both have an edge to them in most cases. And, you know, these are the things that I was a huge sports fan and all that stuff too. But I think when I look at it now, I think language is so important, and specificity, and so much of the advice I give and when I work with people and talk with people, it's like I pay, when I'm consulting, I pay attention to like, what are the words they're saying? Right. And why are they choosing that word? And I'm sure in interviewing, by the way, then I go on to journalism, and interviewing is another piece of that. And, and now broadcasting and teaching and all that kind of stuff. But I really think, the comedy and hip hop just informed everything. And I also think it really helped me. It informed my viewpoint, but I also think, if you're watching, especially at a young age, if you're watching stand up all the time, you're seeing how they deliver the words, how they use the words, how they're pacing. Same thing with hip hop, right? And the ability to sort of in very few words paint these pictures and do all this stuff. And I think it's really, in many ways, those two things I think have informed my writing as much as the journalism or anything else.
So someone's listening to this and they want to improve their tone, or they want to have a more distinct style. What's your advice to them?
Well, I guess I'll talk about my own style, because I don't know if I can teach someone else to, create their own style, even though they have it. One thing that I'll say, and I wrote a blog post about this, a few years ago, is, people talk about finding their voice. And I don't think you find your voice. I think you develop your voice. And here we go immediately with word choice, right? That's a small difference, but it is a massive difference. I think a lot of times people get paralyzed and sort of like, when, I'm just got to find my voice. And it's like, no, when you realize like, no, you're actually going to develop that. And maybe you develop it through trial and error. Maybe you develop it by writing a lot. Maybe like there's a million ways. And in that post, I think I talk about some ways to further develop it. But the idea that you are actively doing and building it versus waiting for this, like, it's the same thing where I have a weird thing with like inspiration, right? The idea that you're just going to like magically be struck and get inspired. You're not going to magically find your voice one day and go, oh, there it is. There's my voice. Like that's not how it works. So I think that's one thing, is definitely like take an active and, in trial and error, but literally go like, all right, I'm going to write a blog post. I'm going to channel this voice for a blog post, and then I'm going to channel this other voice, and let's see how it feels to write, and let's see how people respond to it, and let's see sort of where it goes. There's a great, Rick Rubin has a tactic that he uses, with, artists who get creatively stuck. And one of the things he tells them to do is he's like, pick an artist you love and write a song for them instead of for you. Right. Nice. And it's a great exercise. And I think, but like, again, that's like taking that active sort of development. For me, or for people that want to write sort of more clearly, reduction is so much of it. I think two parts. So one is almost everything can be reduced. My favorite writing tip, 100% effective for everybody in all situations. This is the simplest, best writing tip I can possibly give you, is anything you write when you are done and you're about to hit publish or you're about to submit it or whatever you're going to do a word count. Then decide to force yourself to eliminate at least 10% of the words, maybe even go for 20%. It will always get better. And the reason why it's going to get better is not only because things, most things are a little bloated and can be reduced, but from an editing perspective, the way most people edit is they write something and then they read it over. And what they're essentially asking themselves is, do I need this paragraph? Do I need this thing? Is this valuable? And you're always going to skew to yes, right? It's very hard to reduce that stuff. But when you instead go, I have to cut 10%. I have to cut 20%. Now you're not saying, is this paragraph valuable or not? Now you're going, what is the least valuable 10% or 20%? Can I take this sentence that's 10 words and make it 5? I have to cut down these words. And that subtle mind shift will completely change the way you edit and will make everything you write much stronger. I've never done nothing I've ever written or I've seen anyone else write is ever worse after cutting 10, 20%. And you'll be amazed because, again, I do it at the very end, like when I think I'm done. Like I've already edited it. Like this is done. Like this is as good as it's going to get. And then you force yourself to cut stuff. And it's like, oh, this is better. So that's the piece. And then the last thing I would say about voice is really understanding that every single word is sending a whole bunch of messages that go beyond the word itself. And thinking about it on that level, right? So for example, like here's a very simple example. If I choose to describe a product as, something that's going to help you grow your business, that's very different than something that's going to help you grow your audience. A lot of people will think that that's sort of the same, right? This idea that like words are interchangeable, they are to a certain extent, right? But the connotations that all these words carry with them are going to say something, right? So like your course, right? The art of interviewing, right? That's what it's called. The art of interviewing.
Yes.
Okay. The art of interviewing could have been the craft of interviewing. Same thing. But craft is going to attract some people more than art. And it's going to repel some people more than art, right? The art of interviewing could have been the art of asking questions. Some people, and there's no right or wrong, but I think recognizing that in everything you do, again, on a word level, on a product level, on anything, that these words carry with them, they're not interchangeable. And I think a lot of people think a lot of words are interchangeable or just don't really think about it. They don't think or realize that they're making a choice. So aiming for specificity, like one of the things I always bring up to people is they'll ask me to like review their sales page or their copy for something or their, something where they're talking about their audience. And it'll say like, I help people become better leaders. People is a horrible word. It's to me, I'm always like, that's like the biggest red flag. Like go look at everything you do and see if it has the word people in it. Not that there's anything wrong with people, but it's an opportunity to get more specific. Is it people? Is it women? Is it business people? Is it CEOs? Is it moms? Is it ambitious people? Is it, overwhelmed people? Is it whatever? When you just use words like people, you're punting a huge opportunity to resonate and connect more. And I think one of the biggest reasons why people do that is because they don't want to scare people off. Like they like that catch-all thinking it's going to help them. They don't realize it's actually going to hurt them because you want to be whatever you're trying to communicate, you want it to be perfect for someone, not okay for everyone.
I just listened to a podcast with you where you roasted the host on that exact scenario. So it's funny that you bring that up in this podcast as well. That was like a writing masterclass, and I feel like I'm going to have to rewind that to just fully ingest exactly what you said.
Thanks.
What other common mistakes do people make when writing on the internet?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, and I think this is both a writing mistake and a business and marketing mistake sort of all wrapped into one. I think whatever you're doing, success is rooted in providing specific value to a specific audience. And I think a lot of people, one or both of those things is very general, right? And so I think the more that you can choose that. And by the way, specific doesn't have to be narrow. It could be broad, but it has to be specific, right? You want to be specific about here's who this thing that I'm creating is for, and here's what it's going to help them do, right? Here's what it's going to help them accomplish. And usually that's a transformation, right? So I always tell people, like, whenever I say that specific value for a specific audience, people turn around and they go, okay, but what's value? What do you mean? How do you define value? And my definition of value is really transformation, right? your specific audience is at point A. They want to get to point B. Your content, your product, your service, your whatever you're doing is the bridge that gets them there. If there's no transformation, it's highly unlikely that it's valuable. It might be interesting. And this is another thing where I talk about the difference between interesting and valuable, right? Lots of newsletters, lots of writing online is interesting. Oh, I didn't know that. That was interesting. But if it doesn't help the person make a transformation, it's not actionable. If it's not, what can I do after consuming that information? Then it's not valuable. And that's okay. You can create stuff and share things that are just interesting and not valuable. Where it becomes problematic is if you're trying to build businesses around interesting. Much easier to build businesses around valuable.
I'm curious then how like drama podcasts, let's say, would play in, let's just say Joe Rogan, just to give a broad example, not saying he's a drama podcast, but Joe Rogan, what's the transformation that he's giving people?
So it depends a little bit on the episode, right? Mm-hmm. Some episodes, it's very obvious, right? He has someone on that's like, this person's teaching you how to, live a healthier life or what, it's a whatever. Others, it's less obvious, right? He's just interviewing some famous person about their experiences or their stories or whatever, right? That's just interesting content. But there's a couple things to understand. Joe Rogan's audience actually isn't his audience. Joe Rogan's audience is his advertisers from a business perspective.
Oh, interesting.
So now if you ask the same question, what's the value he's giving to his advertisers? He's attracting a certain type of audience that they want. The transformation is before their point A for an advertiser is, I need these kind of people to know I exist and I need them to buy my product. The after is they know I exist and they bought my product. Wow. Right? So this gets into business models, right? In almost all business models, certainly podcasts, newsletters, certainly media businesses, you need to get really clear on you're either selling to your audience or you're selling your audience to someone else. You can do a hybrid thing, but basically it's one of those options. And this is, I think, also where people get tripped up because they look at sort of entertainment stuff. They go, well, NBC puts on The Office. Why is that valuable? Well, it's valuable to advertisers. NBC's audience is advertisers, not the people watching the show.
If you enjoyed this clip, watch the full episode right over here, and don't forget to subscribe.